3 weeks after Riverside General's shutdown, I answered a call button from room 304 where Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez had died 2 months earlier, asking me to check her 4-drip. My name is Marco Chen, and I've been a critical care nurse for 12 years. I've seen patients flatline, watched families say goodbye, held hands with the dying. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happens when the dead refuse to leave. Riverside General closed its doors on October 15th after the bankruptcy hearing. 43 years of serving the community, gone overnight. The administrators gave us 2 weeks to transfer patients and clear equipment. Most of us found positions elsewhere, but I stayed behind as part of the skeleton crew handling the transition. Someone had to ensure the medical waste disposal, secure the pharmaceuticals, maintain the building systems until the property management company took over. The hospital felt different, empty. Not just quiet, hospitals are never truly quiet, but hollow. The absence of ventilators breathing, monitors beeping, conversation echoing through corridors. Even the air felt thinner, like the building itself was struggling to breathe. I'd walk the halls during my final inspections, checking rooms that had housed hundreds of patients over the decades. Each room held ghosts of conversations, final words, last breaths. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez had been one of our regulars. Chronic heart failure, diabetic complications, kidney issues that brought her back every few months. She was 82, sharp as a tack, with the wicked sense of humor that kept the night shift entertained. Room 304 was practically her second home. She'd joked that she should get a nameplate for the door. Eleanor died on August 3rd, peaceful, surrounded by family, exactly how she'd wanted it. I was there when she took her last breath, held her daughter Maria's hand as we turned off the machines. The call button system should have been disconnected weeks ago. Building maintenance confirmed it. The electrical contractors had cut power to all patient room systems on October 20th. I'd personally watched them flip the breakers, lock the panels. Yet, at 11:47 p.m. on November 8th, the call light for room 304 illuminated at the nurse's station, accompanied by the familiar chime I'd heard thousands of times before. I stared at that light for 30 seconds, listening to my heartbeat echo in the empty corridor. The rational part of my brain, the part trained in evidence-based medicine, ran through possibilities. Electrical malfunction, residual power in the system, faulty wiring triggering false signals. But my hands were already moving toward the intercom button, muscle memory from 12 years of responding to patients in need. When I pressed the response button, Eleanor Vasquez's voice came through crystal clear. "Marcus, honey, could you check my 4? It feels like it's running dry." The same voice I'd heard dozens of times, with the same slight tremor from her copt, the same hint of concern that never quite masked her innate politeness. I stood frozen, staring at speakers that shouldn't work, hearing words from a woman I'd helped bury 2 months ago. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I'd been working alone at Riverside General since the official closure, completing the medical equipment inventory and ensuring proper disposal protocols. The hospital administration needed someone familiar with the facility to oversee the transition. 12 years of night shifts made me the obvious choice. I knew every corridor, every supply closet, every quirk of the aging building systems. My routine was methodical. Evening rounds checking all former patient areas, ensuring no equipment had been missed. Temperature logs for the remaining medication storage. Security sweeps of each floor, documenting any maintenance issues for the property management company. The basement morgue had been cleared weeks ago, but I still checked the refrigeration unit's daily protocol demanded it. The building's quirks had become familiar over the years. The HVAC system that clicked and groaned after midnight. The elevator on the east wing that occasionally opened on empty calls. The emergency lighting that flickered during power fluctuations. Normal sounds for a 43-year-old structure with aging electrical systems. I'd learned to distinguish between building, settling, and actual problems. Tonight felt different from the moment I badged in at 10 p.m. The air temperature in the main corridor read 61 degrees on my handheld thermometer, 6 degrees below the programmed setting of 67. I'd checked the HVAC controls in the maintenance room. System showed normal operation, heating elements cycling properly. Yet every room I entered registered the same impossible reading, exactly 61 degrees, no variation. I documented the anomaly in my log, noting the consistent temperature drop across all monitored areas. Facility management would need to investigate the climate control system before winter fully set in. Old buildings required constant attention, especially during seasonal transitions. But the precision bothered me. Identical readings in spaces with different exposure, different insulation, different heat loads. By 11:30, I'd completed the third-floor sweep and was heading to the nurses' station to update my reports. The computer terminals were still active. Part of my job was maintaining the digital records system until the final data transfer. I pulled up the building automation interface to check the HVAC diagnostics. Every sensor showed normal operation. Supply air temperature, return air temperature, humidity levels, all within acceptable parameters. Yet my handheld thermometer still reads 61 degrees. I was entering the temperature discrepancy in my incident report when the computer screen flickered. For 3 seconds, the building management interface disappeared, replaced by what looked like patient monitoring data. Heart rate 72 BPM, blood pressure 110/70ths, oxygen saturation 98%, normal vital signs for a stable patient. Then the screen returned to the HVAC controls as if nothing had happened. I refreshed the browser, thinking it was a cached page error. Medical monitoring software had been uninstalled weeks ago during the system cleanup. No patient data should exist anywhere in the network. I checked the running processes, reviewed the installed programs. Clean system exactly as expected. But the timestamp on those phantom vitals read 11:34 p.m., the exact moment I'd observed them. At 11:40, my radio crackled with static. I carried a handheld unit to communicate with the security guard who made perimeter checks twice per shift. "Marcus, you copy?" Came through clearly, but it wasn't Jerry's voice. Jerry was 62, smoky baritone from 40 years of cigarettes. This voice was younger, clearer, with an accent I couldn't place. "Jerry, is that you?" I responded. Static. Then, "Marcus, I need assistance in room 218. Patients asking for pain medication." Room 218 had been empty since September. The last patient there was David Morrison, a construction worker who'd fallen from scaffolding. He'd recovered well, discharged on September 12th, with instructions to follow up with orthopedics. I'd been the one to remove his the 4th, help him with the discharge paperwork. "Jerry, what's your location?" "I'm not reading any personnel on the 2nd floor." More static. When it cleared, Jerry's familiar voice came through. "Marcus, you called for assistance?" "I'm at the main entrance. Everything's secure out here." I stood in the corridor, staring at the radio. 2 different voices, 2 different conversations, using the same frequency. The rational explanation was signal interference, maybe emergency services or security from nearby. Businesses bleeding through. But the mention of room 218, the specific request for pain medication, felt too targeted to be coincidence. I decided to walk the 2nd floor, verify that all rooms remained empty and secure. The corridor was dark except for the emergency lighting that activated on motion sensors. My footsteps echoed differently here, less hollow than the other floors, as if the space was somehow more dense. Room 218 was 3 doors down from the nurses' station, positioned on the east wing where morning sunlight would help with patient recovery. The door was closed, which was unusual. I'd made a point of leaving all patient room doors open during my evening inspections, better air circulation. easier visual confirmation that spaces remained empty. I turned the handle slowly, listening for any sound from within. The door opened onto complete darkness. I reached for the light switch, muscle memory guiding my hand to the exact location beside the doorframe. The fluorescent bulbs flickered twice before illuminating the space. Empty bed, properly made with fresh linens I'd installed weeks ago. Medical equipment removed, surfaces sanitized, ready for decommission, exactly as it should be. But the bed showed impressions. Slight depressions in the mattress, where a person's head and torso would rest. The pillow was indented, the blankets disturbed in a pattern consistent with recent occupation. I approached carefully, noting the body-shaped compression in the bedding. The impressions were human-sized, adult male proportions, positioned exactly where David Morrison would have rested during his stay. I touched the mattress. Cold, but not just from the building's temperature. This was deeper cold, the kind that penetrates fabric and foam, suggesting prolonged exposure to something colder than the surrounding air. My breath was visible when I leaned over the bed, impossible in a 61-degree room, but there it was, little puffs of vapor forming with each exhalation. The call button beside the bed was blinking, slow, rhythmic pulses of red light against the darkness. I followed the cord to where it connected to the wall-mounted patient communication system, the system Jerry himself had helped disconnect 3 weeks ago, pulling plugs and confirming no power to any patient room call systems. Yet here it was, blinking steadily, waiting for someone to answer a call that couldn't exist. I was reaching for my radio to report the electrical anomaly when room 304's call light illuminated at the far end of the corridor, accompanied by that familiar chime. Then room 212's light joined it. Then room 207. Within 30 seconds, 8 different patient rooms were signaling for assistance, their call lights creating a pattern of red beacons in the darkness. The impossible had become systematic. 8 call lights meant 8 patients requesting assistance. 12 years of critical care nursing had programmed my response. Assess, prioritize, respond. But these weren't patients. These were rooms that had been empty for weeks, in a building where the electrical systems had been systematically disconnected. I stood in that corridor, watching red lights pulse in sequence, fighting between professional instinct and impossible reality. The rational approach was clear. Document the electrical malfunction. Contact building maintenance, file an incident report. Faulty wiring could explain the phantom signals. Old buildings were notorious for electrical anomalies, especially during the transition between active use and decommission. But 8 separate call systems activating simultaneously suggested something more complex than random failure. I started with room 212, closest to my position. The door was ajar, which wasn't how I'd left it during evening rounds. I pushed it open carefully, reaching for the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs illuminated a space that should have been empty but felt occupied. The bed was disturbed, blankets pulled back as if someone had just gotten up. The patient table was positioned beside the bed, exactly where I'd place it for medication administration. The call button was actively blinking, faster now, more urgent. I stared at it for 10 seconds, professional training warring with self-preservation. If I answered that call, I'd be validating something that couldn't be real. If I didn't answer, I'd be abandoning my patients again. That's when the voice came through the intercom. "Nurse, I'm having trouble breathing. Could you check my oxygen?" Robert Harrison. Room 212's last patient before closure. Emphysema. Admitted for respiratory distress on September 8th. We'd stabilized him with supplemental oxygen, managed his medications, coordinated discharge with home health services. He'd left on September 15th, walking under his own power, oxygen levels stable. But his voice was unmistakable, the slight wheeze, the careful pacing between words. "Mr. Harrison," I heard myself respond. "Is that you?" "Marcus, thank God, my breathing's gotten worse since dinner. The nasal cannula doesn't seem to be working properly." I looked at the wall-mounted oxygen outlet. Disconnected weeks ago, the supply valve physically removed by medical gas contractors. No oxygen flowed through those lines. No equipment remained to deliver it. Yet I could hear the familiar hiss of oxygen flow through the intercom, the soft sound that accompanied every respiratory patient's room. Professional protocol demanded I respond to patient distress. 12 years of critical care had conditioned me to act first, question later. But this patient had been discharged. This room was empty. This conversation was impossible. Mr. Harrison, I need to verify something. Can you tell me what day it is? A pause. Then, Wednesday, September 14th. The day before discharge, remember? You said my oxygen levels looked good for going home tomorrow. September 14th was 3 months ago. Today was November 8th. Robert Harrison had been discharged, recovered, returned to his life. Yet here he was, trapped in the day before his release, asking for help with equipment that no longer existed. I backed out of room 212, my hands shaking as I reached for the radio. Jerry, I need you to verify something. How many personnel are currently in the building? Just you and me, Marcus. Building's locked down tight. Why? I'm hearing voices from the patient rooms. Multiple rooms showing active call lights. Static filled the channel. When Jerry's voice returned, it was cautious. Marcus, you feeling all right? You've been working a lot of overtime lately. Maybe you should head home early tonight. Home. Back to my apartment, back to normal life, back to pretending this wasn't happening. But the call lights were still active, still pulsing, still demanding attention. Room 304's intercom crackled to life. Marcus, honey, my 4-drip finished. Could you start a new bag? Eleanor Vasquez, 2 months dead, asking for 4 fluids. I was moving before conscious thought took over, walking toward her voice like I'd done dozens of times when she was alive. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself was becoming denser. The temperature was dropping. My handheld thermometer now read 58 degrees. My breath was visible in the corridor, small puffs of vapor that dissipated slowly in the still air. Room 304's door stood open. Eleanor's favorite room, where she'd spent her final weeks. I'd arranged the bed, positioning myself, angled so she could see the small garden visible through the window. The space looked exactly as it had during her last stay. Bed elevated to 30 degrees. Bedside table positioned for easy reach, call button within grasp of her right hand. And there, in the bed, was the clear outline of a human form. Not visible in the traditional sense. No physical body. No solid presence, but an unmistakable impression in the mattress, depression in the pillow, displacement of the blankets consistent with Eleanor's petite frame. The 4 poles stood beside the bed, positioned exactly where I'd placed it during her final admission. There you are, sweetheart, came Eleanor's voice from the intercom. I've been waiting. The 4th bag is nearly empty, and you know how dehydrated I get. I looked at the 4-pole. No bag hung from the hooks. No tubing connected to anything. But I could hear the steady drip, drip, drip of 4 fluids hitting the collection chamber, the sound that had punctuated Eleanor's final weeks. Eleanor, the 4 system has been removed. There's no fluids to administer. Oh, Marcus, don't be silly. Look right there, the bag's almost empty. Maybe a liter of saline? You always took such good care of me. This was the moment. The decision point where rational thought met impossible reality. I could walk away, file a report about electrical malfunction, pretend this wasn't happening. Or I could engage with what appeared to be the ghostly presence of my former patient, asking for care that couldn't be provided. Every principle of evidence-based medicine screamed that this was impossible. Patients don't linger after death. Voices don't emerge from disconnected intercoms. 4 bags don't exist in empty rooms. But Eleanor's voice held the same gentle insistence I remembered, the same trust that I would provide the care she needed. Eleanor, you died on August 3rd. I was there. Your daughter Maria was there. We held your hands as you passed. Silence through the intercom. Then, softer. "I remember, honey. I remember the pain stopping. I remember feeling peaceful. But I'm still here, still thirsty, still needing my medications. And you're still my nurse." The ethical dilemma crystallized with brutal clarity. If these were truly the spirits of former patients, then they remained under my professional care. The nursing oath doesn't distinguish between the living and the dead. It commits to alleviating suffering, period. But engaging with impossible patients meant abandoning rational thought, accepting a reality that contradicted everything I'd been trained to believe. I was weighing this impossible choice when room 218's intercom activated. "Marcus, the pain's getting worse. Could I get something stronger? The Percocet isn't touching it anymore." David Morrison, the construction worker who'd recovered fully, discharged with minimal pain medication. But his voice carried the strain I remembered from his worst nights, when bone pain from the fractures kept him awake despite our best efforts. "David? What's wrong?" "Same as before. The leg fractures. They're throbbing, man. I can't get comfortable. Could you page Dr. Peterson about increasing the pain meds?" Dr. Peterson had left Riverside General in July, transferred to a position in Phoenix. David had been discharged in September with oral pain medications, his fractures healing properly. Yet here he was, still experiencing the worst of his injury, still trapped in the moment of greatest need. Then room 231 joined the chorus. "Nurse Chun, my chemotherapy finished about an hour ago. Could you disconnect the 4 and check my port site? Susan Williams, breast cancer patient, stage IIIA, aggressive treatment protocol." She'd completed her final infusion on July 22nd, celebrated with her family, in that very room. I'd been the one to remove her port when treatment concluded successfully. She'd hugged me with tears of joy, promising to send updates about her recovery. But on July 18th, 4 days before her final treatment, Susan had experienced severe nausea and port site irritation. She'd been frightened, asking repeatedly for reassurance that the treatment was working. That was the voice I heard now, not the joyful survivor who'd completed therapy, but the scared patient from her most difficult day. Each patient was trapped in their moment of greatest need, reliving the fears and pain that had defined their hospital stay. Not their recovery, not their healing, not their successful discharge, but the worst hours of their medical crises, playing on eternal loop. "Listen to me, all of you," I called out to the empty rooms. "I'm here. I'm listening. But I can't provide medical care to patients who are no longer alive." The intercoms fell silent for 30 seconds. Then Eleanor's voice returned, softer now, almost pleading. "Marcus, honey, we're not asking for miracles, just the basic care. Check our IVs, adjust our medications, sit with us when the pain gets bad. The same kindness you showed when we were alive." The building's HVAC system had gone completely silent. No air circulation, no mechanical sounds, just the steady pulse of call lights and the impossible conversations with patients who shouldn't exist. My radio had been quiet for 20 minutes. No check-ins from Jerry. No response when I tried to raise him. I was alone in a building with the dead, and they were asking me to be their nurse. The decision crystallized with the clarity that comes before irreversible action. These patients needed care. The fundamental principle of nursing alleviating suffering didn't distinguish between the living and the dead. If consciousness persisted after death, if pain could linger beyond physical existence, then my professional obligation remained unchanged. I returned to room 304 first, Eleanor's room. Her voice through the intercom was weaker now, tired in the way I remembered from her final days. "Marcus, I'm still waiting for that 4-bag, sweetheart." I approached the empty IV pole and performed the motions I'd completed thousands of times before. Hands moved with muscle memory. Check the existing line. Assess the drip rate. Calculate the remaining volume. I see it, Eleanor. About 200 milliliters left. Let me get you a fresh bag of saline. Of course, there was no saline, no force supplies anywhere in the building. But I walked to where the supply closet had been, opened the empty cabinet, and reached for the phantom bag that Eleanor could apparently see. The moment my hand touched the space where the 4 bags should be, the temperature plummeted. My breath became visible clouds. The walls themselves seemed to contract, and I could feel it, the smooth plastic of an ore bag, cold to the touch, full of fluid. I lifted the invisible saline bag, carried it to Eleanor's room, hung it on the empty IV pole. My hands went through the familiar motions, spike the bag, prime the tubing, check for air bubbles. Except there was no bag, no tubing, no connection to anything real. But Eleanor sighed with relief through the intercom. "Thank you, honey. That feels much better already." The impossible had become routine. I was providing nursing care to patients who existed only as voices and temperature drops. Each action felt simultaneously surreal and completely natural, the logical extension of 12 years spent responding to human need. Room 218 was next. David Morrison's construction worker voice carried more hope now. "Marcus, man, thanks for coming. This pain is killing me." I entered his room. Same impression in the bed, same sense of occupied space. But David's pain was different from Eleanor's needs. Pain management required controlled substances, precise dosing, careful monitoring for respiratory depression. "What's your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10, David?" "Solid 8, maybe 9. The broken ribs are the worst part. Can't take deep breaths without feeling like I'm getting stabbed." I remembered his injury pattern. Multiple rib fractures, complications from the fall. We'd managed his pain with a combination of opioids and nerve blocks. But pain medication required doctor's orders, locked dispensing systems, strict documentation protocols. "David, I need to check with the physician about increasing your medication. Dr. Peterson will need to approve any changes to your pain regimen." Doc Peterson already approved it. He was just in here. Said you could give me the morphine push, then start a PC, a pump for breakthrough pain. Dr. Peterson had left months ago. No physician remained on staff. No morphine existed in the building. Yet David's voice carried the desperation of uncontrolled pain, the kind of suffering that nursing instincts demanded I address immediately. I found myself walking to the medication room, inputting my access code into a dispensing system that had been deactivated weeks ago. The screen remained black. No power, no connectivity, no medications. But when I pressed the buttons for morphine sulfate, 4 milligrams for push, I heard the mechanical dispensing sound, felt the small vial drop into my palm. Impossible. I returned to David's room with phantom morphine, prepared phantom injection, administered phantom pain relief into a phantom 4 line connected to a phantom patient. "Oh God, that's better." David's voice relaxed immediately. "Marcus, you're a lifesaver." Room after room, the pattern repeated. Each patient trapped in their moment of greatest medical need. Each requiring specialized care that I somehow provided despite the complete absence of equipment, medications, or any physical reality to support the interventions. Susan Williams needed her chemotherapy port flushed and disconnected. I performed the sterile procedure with supplies that existed only in the space between reality and necessity. Robert Harrison required oxygen therapy adjustments. I manipulated controls on equipment that had been removed weeks ago. Listening to his breathing improve through disconnected intercoms. Mrs. Chun, no relation. Despite sharing my surname, needed cardiac monitoring after her heart attack. I interpreted phantom EKG strips, adjusted phantom drip rates for phantom vasopressor medications. Each impossible intervention worked. Each patient's condition improved. Each voice carried gratitude for care that couldn't exist. But something was changing. The temperature continued dropping. My handheld thermometer read 45 degrees now. Frost was forming on the windows. The building's structure groaned under stress it shouldn't be experiencing, and the patients were getting stronger. Eleanor's voice was clearer now, more present. Marcus, honey, I feel so much better. Like I have energy again. Like I could get up and walk around. David Morrison, the pain's completely gone now. I feel like I could go back to work tomorrow. Susan William, Z nausea is fading. I think the treatment is working better than expected, one by one. My impossible patients were recovering from conditions that had defined their darkest medical moments. The phantom treatments were succeeding in ways that reality never allowed. Eleanor's heart failure was resolving. David's fractures were healing. Susan's cancer was responding to phantom chemotherapy, but recovery meant discharge, and discharge meant Marcus. Eleanor's voice was different now. Stronger, but also more distant, I think. I think I'm ready to go home now. The call light for room 304 went dark. The impression in her bed slowly faded. The temperature in the room began to rise. Thank you, her voice whispered through the intercom one final time. For everything. For not abandoning us when we needed you most. Room 218's call light flickered off. David Morrison's presence evaporated like morning mist. Room 231 went dark. Susan Williams departed with quiet gratitude. One by one, my patients were leaving. Not dying, they'd already done that months ago, but finally healing from the trauma that had kept them anchored to their worst moments. The care I'd provided, impossible as it was, had somehow allowed them to process their medical fears, resolve their unfinished needs, find peace with their hospital experience. Within minutes, all 8 call lights were dark. The building's temperature returned to normal. The HVAC system resumed its familiar mechanical sounds. My radio crackled to life with Jerry's voice. Marcus, you still there? Lost radio contact for a while. Everything okay? I stood in the empty corridor, surrounded by vacant rooms that no longer felt occupied. The phantom equipment had vanished. The impossible medications no longer existed even as concepts. The patients who'd required my care were finally truly at rest. But one call light remained active. Room 106, first floor. A room I hadn't visited tonight. The voice through the intercom was unfamiliar. Young, female, frightened. Hello? Is anyone there? I'm scared. I don't know what's happening to me. A new patient. Someone who died recently, perhaps in another hospital, drawn to Riverside General by the same forces that had trapped the others. Someone who needed the same impossible care I'd just provided. I looked at my watch, 3:17 a.m. My shift officially ended at 6 a.m. But nursing didn't follow shift schedules when patients needed care. I walked toward the elevator, toward room 106, toward the next impossible patient who required my help. The dead, it seemed, would always need nursing. Room 106 held a 24-year-old woman named Jennifer Walsh. Car accident victim, traumatic brain injury, had died 3 days ago at St. Mary's Medical Center across town. But somehow she'd found her way to Riverside General. Confused and frightened, asking for someone to explain what was happening to her. I spent 2 hours with Jennifer that night, providing the same impossible care I'd given the others. Phantom neurological assessments, phantom comfort measures, phantom explanations about her condition delivered with the gentle honesty that terminal diagnoses require. When she finally understood and accepted her death, when her fears about pain and confusion were addressed, her call light went dark like the others. I completed my shift at 6 a.m. as scheduled, locking the building behind me as I'd done every night for 3 weeks. Jerry was waiting by his security vehicle, smoking his first cigarette of the morning. "Quiet night?" he asked, the same question he posed every morning. "Busy night," I answered truthfully, "but peaceful by the end." He nodded, probably thinking I'd meant paperwork or equipment inventory. We said our goodbyes, made plans for the next evening's handoff. Just another routine transition between security shifts at a closed hospital. But in my car, I found something impossible. A handwritten thank you note on hospital stationery, signed by Eleanor Vasquez in her distinctive handwriting. "Marcus, thank you for not giving up on us." Your kindness made all the difference. We're at peace now. Eleanor and the gang from third floor. The note was impossible. Eleanor had been dead for 2 months. Hospital stationery had been cleared out weeks ago. No one could have written it, placed it in my locked car, known about the night's events. Yet there it was, tangible proof of an impossible experience. I keep it in my wallet now, next to my nursing license and family photos. I submitted my final report to the hospital administration the next morning. Standard documentation, building secured, no incidents to report, transition complete. I didn't mention the call lights, the phantom patients, the impossible care I'd provided. Who would believe it? More importantly, who needed to know? The property management company took possession of Riverside General on November 15th. The building was demolished 6 months later, replaced by a shopping complex with a pharmacy and urgent care clinic. Progress, they called it. More efficient use of prime real estate. I transferred to St. Mary's Medical Center, back to active, critical care nursing with living patients who require tangible interventions. The work is rewarding in familiar ways. Successful codes, patients who recover. Families who express gratitude for care that produced measurable outcomes. But sometimes, during quiet moments on night shifts, I find myself listening for phantom call lights, checking empty rooms for impressions in mattresses, wondering if other closed hospitals hold patients who haven't yet found peace with their medical experiences. Last week I heard that the old Mercy Hospital downtown is scheduled for closure next month. Budget cuts, patient volumes transferred to newer facilities. The administration is looking for experienced nurses to handle the transition, supervise the final weeks of operation. I've been thinking about applying. After all, someone needs to be there for the patients who can't let go. Someone who understands that nursing doesn't end with death. That compassion doesn't recognize the boundary between the living and the dead. Someone who's learned that the most important care sometimes happens after visiting hours in empty rooms, with patients who exist only as voices asking for help. The dead, I've discovered, make surprisingly good patients. They're always grateful for attention. They never complain about wait times. They don't question treatment plans or demand second opinions.